In this video, I'm going to give you a real quick rundown of how to create value scales. A value scale is simply a shading or blending from light to dark. And we're going to show you with 4 different materials: pencils, Sharpies, crayons, and oil pastels, how to make a value scale from light to dark. Real simple. Starting off with shading. We can leave our first value completely white because that's what the paper is, and that's the lightest value you can get with a pencil, is doing nothing. For the second value, notice I'm going to turn my pencil sideways instead of pointing down. That way I can use the side edge of the pencil to gently brush across. Also, instead of holding it real close, I'm going to hold it further back so that I'm not applying any pressure. And I'm just going to gently, lightly shade as little as possible. I'm not pushing down, just trying to make it the lightest value I can possibly make with the pencil. Third, I'm going to do exactly the same thing. I'm not going to change anything. I'm going to make the exact same value once more. But I do want this to get steadily darker as I go up. How do I make this a little bit darker? I can just go over it with a second pass. I don't even have to push down any harder than I was before. I just go over it again. Just making a second pass. And you see that makes it 1 step darker. For step number 4, I want it to be a little bit darker than this. I can move my finger just a little closer to the tip and just start applying a little bit of pressure. And again, I want to push down just hard enough to make it a little bit darker than this. And sometimes I like to start by matching the previous value and then go over it with a second pass like you just saw here. So that's about the same value, and then if I make a second pass, pushing the same amount, just barely harder than I pushed on number 3. It's still not applying very much pressure at all. So a second pass will make it darker. Now again, for number 5, I want to match the value and then make it darker. Again, if I move my finger just a little closer to the tip, I'm going to be pushing down just a little bit harder. And if I give it a second pass, just to make those areas a little bit darker, there we go. And now for the darkest value, I'm going to have my finger right on the tip so that I can push down without breaking it, because if I really start pushing down like this, it's going to break the tip. But if my finger is right on top of it, I can control it and I can push down pretty hard. I'm going to get a little bit of dust on my fingertip, but that's okay. I can clean it up later. And here for this last value, I'm just pushing down as hard as I can. And so you can see, well, as hard as I can without breaking it. You can see that makes the darkest dark value that you can get with a pencil. And so there you have a value scale from light to dark using a regular pencil. We can do the exact same thing with a color. So if I pick a crayon here, it can be any color. Now I would say if you use a light color like a yellow-green, you're only going to be able to make 2, 3, maybe 4 different values. If you use a dark color like a black, you could probably get 10 or 12 different values. I'm just going to pick maybe a purple. Again, for value number 1, we just leave it blank. For number 2, we want to hold it as far back as we can. Don't press down at all. Just super gentle, as light as you can. Just like we did before, just like we did with a pencil. Here, either push down just a little bit more or make a second pass. I like to do it with a second pass because if you push down too hard, you can never lighten it up again. You can always make it darker, but you can't always make it lighter. All right, and Make it again just a little bit darker than it was before. And just try to make it a little bit darker each time. Now, you notice that as I move along, I'm holding it a little closer to the tip so I can push a little bit harder and get it a little bit darker. And for this last one, I'm pretty much going to be pushing the crayon straight down into the paper. Okay, so that's exactly the same as shading with a pencil. But what if I'm using a Sharpie? If I'm using a Sharpie, I can't shade, can I? Because it's always going to make thick black, no matter how hard I push down. So for this, we have to do something called hatching. Now, hatching is not shading, it's lines. We'll leave number 1 blank, just like we have before. And in number 2, we want to make just like 1 or 2 lines. Now, if you look at this right now, it just looks like 2 lines. If you zoom back and look at it from a distance, it will make this square look like it's a little bit darker. Or if you blur your eyes, you know, if you squint, blur your vision a little bit, it'll look like it's just a little bit darker because the black will blend with the white. The trick with hatching is the more black lines you have, the darker it'll be. The more white spaces between the lines, the lighter it will be. So as we move along, we want to have more and more lines. So for number 3 here, maybe I'll have twice as many lines. Here I had 2. Okay, there I got 5, so it's a little more than twice as many. And you can see that because it has more lines, it's darker than this one before it. Okay, for number 4, we want even more lines even closer together. So the lines are much closer together and much less white space between them, and then that area looks even darker. For number 5, we want those lines to be so close together they're almost touching, but not quite. So we're going to have tons and tons and tons of lines. And then for number 6, we almost do want those lines touching. Like if there's little bitty spaces between some of the lines, that's okay. But for number 6, we want those lines so close together that there's very, very, very little white space. Okay? And again, if you squint your eyes in particular, or if you look at this from a distance, those look like lighter to darker values. And one last way is with color mixing. Here I'm going to use oil pastels, and instead of doing white to black or light to dark, I'm going to do color to color. For this, I'm going to choose 2 colors. One of them is going to be a light color, and one of them is going to be a dark color. If I did black and white, that's the darkest and lightest you can get, and your value scale would look much similar to this one. But instead, I think I want to do actual color blending. So maybe I'll start with a yellow, because that's a really light color, or maybe I could use a pink, that's a really light color, or this green, that's a really light color. One of those. I'll probably stick with the yellow. And then on the other end of the spectrum, we want a dark color, like maybe a blue, that's a blue violet, maybe a brown, maybe a deep red. Anything dark will do. And I think I'll go here with this sort of blue violet. Okay. Now, if you're using 2 separate colors like this, make sure you know which one's lighter and which one's darker. Start your scale with the light color on the light side and just fill that box completely with that color. And on the dark side, just fill that box completely with your dark color. All right. So the little paper here looks blue-violet, but that's just a blue. All right, notice I'm filling that completely. pushing hard enough that it would get this number 6 value for either color, right? I'm not trying to do what I did with the crayon where I hold it softly and then push harder. I'm always pushing hard with oil pastels. Not so hard they break, but hard enough that they get a good solid color. Now, here's the tricky part. As I go between these colors, I'm going to be using both of these colors together on each one of these squares. But the amount of yellow versus the amount of blue is going to determine how light or dark this color is. So, for number 2, I'm going to start with just a solid block of yellow, and then very lightly, gently add a tiny amount of blue to it, then go back to my yellow and in small circles blend those colors together. Now, again, for number 3, I want to do the same thing, but use a little bit more of the blue. So I'll start with my yellow, which has a little bit of the blue on it. That's not a problem because I'm not trying to get a pure yellow here. Again, add a little bit. It's best to add a little bit at a time. You can always add more of the dark color. This is why I start with the light color and then work my way darker, because you can always make it darker if you need to. That value is actually lighter than number 2, so I need to add a little bit more blue. It's always easy to make it darker. All right, now they're about the same, so I still need to add more blue. And I blend it in with the lighter color, blend it together. Okay. Now for my next one, I might actually start this time with a little bit of the blue, just because I know I need this to be darker, so that my base tone is a little darker. So I started with a little bit of blue and a lot of yellow, but there's blue in that base tone. And now, at this point, I'm just mixing the blue, using the blue to blend my colors together. Because at this point, if I start using the yellow to blend it together, it's going to get lighter, and I don't want it to get lighter. I need these on this side to be darker. And then for number 5, I want to start with a bluer base. Again, add a little bit of yellow to it. So what I'm doing when I'm blending these colors is starting with a base, and then blending into that base. So the base is a blue-green, and then I'm adding blue to it to make it a little darker. And at this point, those are almost the same, so I need to add more blue. I probably added too much yellow. But there you go, that's pretty darn accurate. Light to dark, yellow to blue. Notice there's greens in the middle. So that's 4 different ways of creating value scales using 4 different materials: pencils, crayons, Sharpie markers, and oil pastels.